Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta Volume 5, Let There Be a Temple, India / Around the World, 1971 through 1975, a biography of His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, by Satsvarup Das Goswami. Chapter 2. No one listens to a poor man. From 1965 until 1970, Srila Prabhupada had concentrated mainly on re-establishing Krishna consciousness in America. His plan had been that if the Americans turned to Krishna consciousness, the rest of the world would follow. Although his preaching to the English-speaking people had begun in India, some 60 years of single-handed endeavor there had convinced him that Indians were either too absorbed in politics, too ignorant of their spiritual heritage, or too crippled by poverty to seriously accept Krishna consciousness. Therefore, he had not been successful. But in the United States, success had come. Clearly, America was the prime field for implanting Krishna consciousness. Yet, Prabhupada found the West uncultured and uncivilized. If a trace of civilization remained anywhere, he would often say, it was in India, the heart of the original Vedic culture. By 1970, he had demonstrated through his extensive traveling and preaching that he intended to establish the Krishna consciousness movement not only in the U.S., but all over the world, especially in India. Even accepting that preaching in the United States and preaching in India were equally important, still the preaching in the United States was going well without Prabhupada's constant direct management. What he had begun, his American disciples could continue. But in India, Prabhupada could not allow his disciples to manage ISKCON. He saw how often and how easily the Indians were able to cheat his disciples. Half of ISKCON's work in India was being spoiled, he said, due to his disciples being cheated. If they put on a Pandal program, they might end up paying several times the standard cost. The only way for ISKCON to develop in India would be under Prabhupada's direct management. Beginning in 1970, with a small band of American disciples, Prabhupada had traveled from place to place in India as a model sannyasi, opening a great new field for ISKCON. Now he wanted to construct big temples in India, 3 in particular, one in Vrindavan, one in Mayapur, and one in Bombay. As early as 1967, he had attempted to make an American house for his disciples in Vrindavan. Mayapur, being the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, was especially important, and Bombay was India's major city, the gateway to India. As with most of Prabhupada's big plans, even his closest disciples couldn't fully comprehend the scope of his vision. But Prabhupada knew what he wanted, and he knew it all depended on Krishna. Gradually, he began to unfold his plans. Temple construction, he said, was secondary to book publication and distribution. But Krishna consciousness must run on 2 parallel lines, just as a train runs on 2 rails. One rail was Bhagavat Marga, the other Pancharatriki Vidhi. Bhagavat Marg referred to the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, hearing and chanting about Krishna, and disseminating the message of Krishna. The second rail, Pancharatriki Vidhi, referred to the rules and regulations for worshiping the deity in the temple. Of the 2, Bhagavat Marg was the more important. Although great liberated souls like Haridas Thakur could remain in perfect Krishna consciousness simply by chanting Hare Krishna constantly, Prabhupada knew that his disciples, with their restless natures and past sinful habits, needed the special purification of worshiping the Lord in the temple. Therefore, one of his reasons for wanting to establish temples in India was to purify his disciples by giving them elaborate deity worship. Temples, however, were also for preaching. No one listens to a poor man, Prabhupada would say, and he therefore wanted to construct palatial buildings to attract the masses to Krishna consciousness. Especially, he wanted this in India, where the tradition of temple worship still existed. Building temples and worshipping the deity was secondary to publishing and distributing books, but it was not to be neglected. Prabhupada prepared to give temple construction in Mayapur, Vrindavan, and Bombay as much of his attention as necessary. Bombay, November 1971. For a year, the devotees had been living at the Akash Ganga address, 2 apartments on the 7th floor of a building in the heart of Bombay. But Prabhupada was not satisfied with this. He wanted land in Bombay to build on and to expand. He was determined. Instead of his usual morning walks, he would take long rides in his car to observe various parts of the city. Because many of the ISKCON Life members lived in aristocratic Malabar Hill, Prabhupada's disciples thought it a good place for a temple. On several occasions, Prabhupada rode to the top of Malabar Hill and walked around various properties, considering certain large buildings as possible temples. But for one reason or another, he judged them all unacceptable. Then in November, a Mr. N offered to sell ISKCON 5 acres in Juhu, practically on the shore of the Arabian Sea. As soon as Srila Prabhupada approached the land, he remembered having seen and considered it years before. In August of 1965, during the weeks just before he had left for America, he had been staying at Scindia Colony. In the evenings, he had gone to the home of Scindia Steamship Company owner Mrs. Sumati Morarji in Juhu, where he had read and explained Srimad Bhagavatam for her and her guests. Several times he had passed this very property and had thought what a good location it would be for an ashram in the Radha Krishna temple. Although his attention had been absorbed in the task of leaving India, he had still considered the Juhu land. Now he was again in Juhu, reconsidering the same land he had noticed years before. He took it as a reminder from Krishna. The land was overgrown with tall grasses and bushes, and many coconut palms stood throughout. In the back of the property were several tenement buildings. The land bordered on Juhu Road, the main traffic artery back to Bombay, 18 miles to the south. A broad expanse of beach on the Arabian Sea was a brief walkway. The location was good, peaceful yet not remote. Several 5-star hotels bordered the nearby beach, and developers were beginning work on other hotels and apartment buildings. When Prabhupada walked along the beach, he liked even more the idea of buying the land. Rich men had weekend homes on the beach, and thousands of Bombayites would be out enjoying the beach on Sundays. Daily, hundreds of Juhu residents used the long, broad seashore for morning walks before going to work. Almost always people were strolling or gathering there, and yet the beach was clean. The mild waves and open skies were inviting. The locale was ideal not only for hotels, but for a Krishna-conscious center. Prabhupada wanted the Juhu land, and although his disciples continued to show him houses in Malabar Hill, he didn't change his mind. His disciples wanted whatever he wanted, yet they had trouble developing enthusiasm for a property so far from the city and with no available housing or temple facility. Mr. N, the owner of the 5-acre plot, had set a reasonable price and seemed friendly and sincere, yet risks were involved in such transactions, and in this case Prabhupada even found reasons for suspicion. Through his lawyer, he learned that Mr. N had previously entered into an agreement to sell this same land to the C Company, but had later canceled the agreement. The C Company had then filed a suit against Mr. N for breach of contract. If the Bombay High Court decided in the C Company's favor, the land would be awarded to them. When Prabhupada's secretary questioned Mr. N about this entanglement, Mr. N assured him the C Company could not win the suit, but that in any case ISKCON could withhold a certain portion of their payment until the litigation with C was settled. Mr. N was a well-known figure in Bombay, formerly the sheriff of Bombay, an honorary judicial police position. He was now publisher-editor of one of the largest daily English newspapers in Bombay. He was wealthy, owning several properties in Juhu and Bombay, and influential, not a man one would want to oppose. To purchase the Juhu land under the present circumstances required boldness. In late December, Prabhupada met with Mr. and Mrs. N at their home in the Theosophical Colony in Juhu. Mr. N's home was on the beach, and thus the visit afforded Prabhupada another opportunity to appreciate the value and beauty of Juhu Beach, with its border of palms leaning toward the sea. The Theosophical Colony was a private neighborhood of attractive homes with luxuriant lawns and flower gardens and many exotic birds. Ashoka trees grew on either side of Mr. N's driveway, and a line of palm trees standing just inside the massive stone wall encircled the property. A gardener opened the gate for Prabhupada and the few disciples with him. Mr. N was a short, stocky man with a receding hairline. His hair was clipped short, and his round face was pockmarked. He appeared to be in his 50s. Mrs. N had a fair complexion, and, unusual for an Indian, wore her hair short. Prabhupada had brought flower garlands and prasadam from the Radha Krishna deities of ISKCON Bombay, and these he offered to Mr. and Mrs. N. Mr. N invited his guests to sit with him and his wife on the front porch, which faced a picturesque garden. Srila Prabhupada openly expressed his appreciation of the Juhu land, but admitted he had very little money. Mr. N, however, seemed inclined toward Prabhupada and said he wanted to sell him the property. Quickly, they reached a verbal agreement. To Mrs. N, however, the agreement seemed too liberal, but when she objected, her husband overruled her. Prabhupada and Mr. N agreed on a down payment of 200,000 rupees. After making the down payment, ISKCON would immediately receive the conveyance. ISKCON would pay the remaining balance of 1,400,000 rupees later in regular installments. Prabhupada negotiated further regarding the down payment, offering to pay 50,000 rupees now and another 50,000 later, at which time ISKCON would be allowed to move into the land or onto the land. As soon as they paid the remaining 100,000 rupees, the down payment would be complete and Mr. N would give them the deed. Mr. N agreed. Srila Prabhupada was always one to think carefully over such business transactions. He had said that if a businessman tells you, "Sir, for you I am making no profit," you should know he is lying. Therefore, even in ISKCON's early days in New York City, when the real estate shark Mr. Price had posed as a well-wisher of the devotees, Prabhupada had been suspicious. Mr. Price had, in fact, cheated the devotees, despite Prabhupada's warnings to them. Now, as then, Prabhupada was suspicious, but he wanted the Juhu land and would take the risk. Prabhupada had taken similar chances. At Jhansi in 1953, he had occupied a building, although he had had little legal standing or financial security. And in his first storefront in New York, as well as in his largest building to date, the Watsika Avenue Church in Los Angeles, he had moved in without assurance of the monthly payments. Practically the entire success of his movement had come by his taking one risk after another for Krishna. When the devotees in Boston had written to Prabhupada that they had rented a big house for $1,000 a month, calculating that they would be able to make the payments by dramatically increasing their Back to Godhead sales, Prabhupada had approved and had even commended their example to others. So, if some risks were involved in Bombay, that was only natural. Once committed to the land, Prabhupada began to unfold his vision for a grand project in Bombay. On December 26, he wrote to Jamuna, quote, "Here in Bombay, we have got good prospects to purchase a very large land in Juhu for a very cheap price, just in the middle of a rich neighborhood. We shall build our camp there and begin constructing a temple immediately, and later on we shall develop a large hotel and school. There was also a chance of getting a nice bungalow in Bombay City also. So, in general, we shall make our headquarters in Bombay and also build up Vrindavan and Mayapur." Unquote. While devotees around the world delighted to hear Prabhupada's plan for a Bombay center, devotees in Bombay had mixed feelings. To envision a temple rising from what was little more than a jungle tract was not easy. Nor was it easy to envision the five-star ISKCON hotel Prabhupada spoke of. The tenement buildings in the rear of the land were fully occupied, and according to Indian law, the tenants could not be removed. If the devotees moved onto the land, they would have to erect temporary housing, maybe even a temporary temple, and the land was mosquito-ridden and teeming with rats. Juhu was a small, almost isolated neighborhood without wealthy ISKCON supporters. Although Prabhupada and land speculators predicted that Juhu would grow, at present it was only a village of about 2,000. To reside at Juhu would be a drastic contrast to the comfortable Akash Ganga building in downtown Bombay. Tamal Krishna explained to Prabhupada, "We are Westerners. We cannot live like this. We need doorknobs and running water." "Don't you want to become purified?" Prabhupada replied. When the Bombay devotees learned of Srila Prabhupada's response to Tamal Krishna, the words, "Don't you want to become purified?" went deep into their hearts. They knew that Prabhupada was asking them to become more austere, and that it was for their ultimate benefit. They began to regard moving to Juhu as a formidable spiritual challenge rather than a drudgery. Developing the Juhu property was important to their spiritual master, and it was something greater and more wonderful than they at present realized. Prabhupada knew he was asking his disciples to make a great sacrifice, but he could not avoid it. To preach Krishna consciousness, a devotee had to be prepared to tolerate many difficulties, and whatever difficulties he was asking his disciples to undertake, he was prepared to undertake to a much greater degree himself. On the one hand, he didn't think that living on the undeveloped Juhu property would be too difficult for his disciples, provided they maintained cleanliness and chanted Hare Krishna. Yet he knew that because they were Westerners, they would find it hard. A preacher nevertheless had to make sacrifices, not artificially or arbitrarily, but to expand the Krishna consciousness movement. Sometimes serving Krishna was pleasurable, sometimes difficult. In either case, a devotee had but to do the needful, acting as a menial servant of the spiritual master. Prabhupada counseled his Bombay disciples, impressing on them his vision for ISKCON Bombay. Although all of them were ready to follow his decision, some of them had been feeling doubtful and weak-hearted. Seeing their spiritual master's commitment to the project, however, they vowed to give up their separatist mentalities. Prabhupada then left for Jaipur for a week's preaching engagement at the Radha Govinda temple. Jaipur, January 12th, 1972. Jaipur is an ancient city in the state of Rajasthan. Occasionally, some of Prabhupada's disciples would go there to purchase marble Radha Krishna deities for ISKCON temples in India and around the world. The devotees in ISKCON centers in Detroit, Toronto, Dallas, as well as throughout Europe, wanted to install Radha Krishna deities, and with Srila Prabhupada's permission, were ordering murtis from Jaipur. On such an errand, two women, Kaushalya and Srimati, had gone to Jaipur in January of 1972 on behalf of the New York City temple. When a government official had discovered Srimati wasn't carrying her passport, the officials, suspicious of spies due to the war with Pakistan, had insisted the women stay in town until Srimati's passport arrived in the mail. Meanwhile, the girls had daily visited the Govindaji temple and had sometimes held kirtan in the street in front of the temple. They had had daily talks with P.K. Goswami, who was in charge of the temple, as well as Jaipur businessmen and other respectable citizens. Almost everyone in Jaipur regularly visits the beloved deities of Radha and Govinda. The citizens of Jaipur had been moved by the devotion of Prabhupada's two disciples, and when one of the men had asked, "What can we do to help your movement?" the girls had replied, "Bring Srila Prabhupada here." Some of Jaipur's prominent citizens had devised a plan to share expenses and responsibilities in arranging a pandal program, and the two women had sent a letter to Prabhupada in Bombay inviting him to come and preach. He had agreed. At Srila Prabhupada's request, devotees from Delhi and other Indian centers came to Jaipur to join him. Prabhupada took a small room within the Govindaji temple compound, and his disciples moved into a nearby house. Prabhupada liked the location. The only disturbance was the many monkeys, large charcoal-faced monkeys with long curling tails. Climbing through the trees and across the rooftops, they would scamper down unexpectedly to steal whatever they could. The women cooking for Prabhupada were exasperated by the monkeys' bold forays to steal vegetables from the kitchen, even chapatis right off the fire, and they complained to Srila Prabhupada. Neither be their friends nor their enemies, Prabhupada advised. If you make friends with them, they will simply be a nuisance. If you become their enemies, they will become very vindictive. Just maintain a neutral position. The monkeys, however, continued to raid the kitchen. Again, the cooks complained to Prabhupada. "Yes," Prabhupada said. "If you want to stop the monkeys, then this is what you must do. Purchase one bow and arrow and shoot a monkey on the top of a tree with the arrow. And then, when he falls down, take the monkey and hang him upside down by the legs to a branch of a tree. Next to him, you also hang the bow and arrow. This will teach them." Prabhupada knew that shooting monkeys was illegal in Jaipur, and he did not expect his disciples to actually shoot them. But he delivered the advice with a serious expression. Indirectly, he was advising them not to be upset over a few monkeys. Prabhupada and his disciples immediately joined in the intense devotional atmosphere of Jaipur. Since the Radha Govinda temple was under the jurisdiction of Jaipur's royal family, to visit the deity daily was practically required for all citizens. Morning and evening, crowds of enthusiastic worshippers would come and go, worshipping the forms of Radha and Krishna on the altar. These were Rupa Goswami's original Radha Govinda deities from Vrindavan. Almost 500 years ago, when a Mughal ruler had attacked the Govindaji temple in Vrindavan, the king of Jaipur had arranged for the deities. The king of Jaipur had arranged for the deities to come to Jaipur. The worshippers at the Radha Govinda Mandir displayed spontaneous excitement in seeing the deities. They would come forward crying, "Jayo, Jayo, Govinda, Govinda." And when the curtains were closing, the people would rush forward to catch a last glimpse of the divine forms. Srila Prabhupada avoided the large crowds before the deity, keeping to his schedule of rising early and translating the Bhagavatam. Speaking with Kaushalya and Srimati, Prabhupada praised them for having arranged the Jaipur Pandal program. "You girls are carrying on Lord Chaitanya's movement so nicely," he said. "Just see, even without husbands, you go on preaching." He said that the Western women were different from Indian women, who simply stayed at home. Then Prabhupada discovered that his two women disciples had not actually done a thorough job. Although the Pandal program was to begin in 2 days, no one had arranged for the large tent to be erected. Prabhupada said it was not a woman's nature to do such organizational work. The women became morose to hear him. When they showed him the flyer they had printed advertising the festival, Prabhupada became angry. "It is not standard," he said. It did not say International Society for Krishna Consciousness, but only A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami and his foreign disciples. "What is this?" Prabhupada shouted. "What, Srila Prabhupada?" Kaushalya asked. "Foreign? Why do you say foreign? It must be American and European. That is what is attractive, that they are American and European. But you are just a woman. What can I expect?" The two women began to cry and left the room. With Shama Sundar's help, Kaushalya and Srimati had new corrected flyers printed and returned to tell Srila Prabhupada. But now His mood had changed completely. His anger was gone. He was soft. After all, these disciples had tried their best. In a disarming disclosure, he began to explain that to be a spiritual master was difficult. I chastise you, he said, because it is my duty. Disciple is related to discipline, so it is my duty to my disciples. Otherwise, I am not upset with anyone. I simply do this to discipline you because you are my disciples. He consoled them, saying they were sincere and lacked expertise because of poor upbringing. The devotees present felt Srila Prabhupada was wonderfully expressing to them a bit of what he, as spiritual master, felt in training them. In a great last-minute endeavor, the devotees obtained the pandal and erected it in time for Prabhupada to begin his program as advertised. On opening day, the devotees held a parade through the streets, and Prabhupada riding on a palanquin, a large embroidered umbrella sheltering his head. Also, in the procession were decorated elephants, brass bands, and devotees, Indian, American, and European, performing kirtan. Srila Prabhupada's first program was in the morning after the darshan of Govindaji, so as to catch the huge morning crowd. People would come hurrying into the temple to see Radha Govindaji, and then proceed out into the large Hare Krishna pandal beside the temple. On the opening morning, Prabhupada performed an Abhishek ceremony, bathing marble deities of Radha and Krishna. He named these deities, soon to be shipped to the ISKCON temple in New York, Radha Govinda. After one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples had performed a fire sacrifice, Prabhupada lectured to the crowd in Hindi. The schedule for the remaining days would be morning and evening lecture, kirtan, and prasadam distribution. While preaching in Jaipur, Srila Prabhupada was simultaneously reflecting on and, through letters to his disciples, acting on matters in many other parts of the world. Although he participated fully, giving 2 lectures a day, and although he constantly met and interacted with guests, friends, and devotees, he was also absorbed in thoughts of other places and concerns. He was conducting his movement on many fronts. Wherever he happened to be at present was his camp, just as a general makes camps in various places while conducting many battles in the overall effort of a war. His preaching in Jaipur, therefore, was only a small fraction of the scope of his worldwide mission. From Jaipur, Prabhupada wrote his disciples in Calcutta, urging them in their development of the Mayapur land. He wanted a grand opening ceremony by Lord Chaitanya's birthday in March. Unfortunately, the government was restricting foreigners from entering Nadia because of its proximity to Bangladesh. Please try very hard to get those permits, Prabhupada urged his men in Calcutta, as we must be all assembled there for Lord Chaitanya's appearance day. Repeatedly, Prabhupada mentioned his concern over the government's restricting his men. Quote, I do not think there will be difficulty if we just go there like the ordinary pilgrims and set up our camp there for kirtan continuously. Anyone will see we are only serious devotees and of Lord Chaitanya and not Pakistani spies. Unquote. Prabhupada wrote ahead to his disciples in Nairobi, driving them onward with his blessings. Continue to work very hard for his pleasure, and all of you will go back to home, back to Godhead. To the San Diego Temple President, Srila Prabhupada wrote, quote, I am very pleased to hear from you that book sales are increasing very fast. I am hearing such good news from all over the society, and this pleases me more than anything. Unquote. And Prabhupada was often thinking of the land in Bombay. Sometimes he talked about it or mentioned it in a letter to his representatives there. The Bombay land purchase was still not finalized, and Prabhupada was particularly anxious that his disciples pay the money as agreed and move immediately onto the land. Tamal Krishna was Srila Prabhupada's governing body commission secretary for India. Some of the devotees said that actually Prabhupada was the GBC secretary for India. Although he allowed his secretaries in other parts of the world to manage mostly on their own and to make their own decisions, in India he would scrutinize even small matters and make most of the decisions himself. Still, he counted on Tamal Krishna as his trusted assistant in important dealings. he would send Tamal Krishna from one Indian center to another to help the local devotees with governmental, legal, organizational, or preaching problems. In Bombay, just prior to coming to Jaipur, Tamal Krishna had asked Prabhupada's permission to take sannyas, the renounced order. Srila Prabhupada had awarded sannyas to only a few men, and he had specified their duties as traveling and preaching. Taking sannyas, therefore, not only meant giving up wife and family, but also renouncing managerial posts. At the same time, as Prabhupada had set up his governing body commission, he had also initiated several sannyasis, purposefully not appointing any of them, even though they were some of the most stable men, as GBC secretaries. The grihastas were to manage the temples as presidents and GBC secretaries, and the sannyasis were to travel and preach. Srila Prabhupada therefore had to carefully consider whether or not to give Tamal Krishna sannyas, and thus lose his GBC secretary for India. On principle, Srila Prabhupada liked the idea of giving Tamal Krishna sannyas. If a young man was actually qualified to give up family life and to use his intelligence and energy in preaching Krishna consciousness, then Prabhupada was always ready to encourage it. The world was in dire need of Krishna consciousness, and even hundreds of sannyasis would still not be enough. On these grounds, how could he not appreciate the request of one of his leading disciples to take sannyas? But first he would test Tamal Krishna's determination. Tamal Krishna was insistent. Seeing that Prabhupada would not make a commitment, Tamal Krishna had adopted the tactic of presenting himself before Prabhupada early in the morning without saying a word. In Bombay, he had entered Prabhupada's room, led the Mangal Arti before the deities, and then sat silently before Srila Prabhupada. Knowing the mind of his disciple, Prabhupada could understand that Tamal Krishna was not only determined, but obstinate. After several days of tolerating Tamal Krishna's silent, insistent presence every morning, Prabhupada had finally agreed to seriously consider the request. Prabhupada was also concerned with Madri Devi Dasi, Tamal Krishna's wife. She was an attractive, intelligent girl who had given her life to Krishna consciousness, and Tamal Krishna, by his own choice, had married her only a year ago. Spiritually, Madri was Srila Prabhupada's daughter, and Prabhupada wanted to protect her from undue disturbance. Even as householders, Tamal Krishna and his wife had been renounced, traveling with Prabhupada throughout India with little time or facility for private life as husband and wife. Tamal Krishna had been in Bombay when Shyamasundar had informed him that Prabhupada had mentioned in a letter to Brahmananda Swami in Africa that Tamal Krishna might take sannyas. Spurred on, he had left his wife in Bombay and joined Prabhupada in Jaipur. On leaving, however, Tamal Krishna had asked Madri for his personal copies of the first 3 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam signed by Srila Prabhupada. Madri had become suspicious. She had asked why he wanted them. "I just want to read them," Tamal Krishna had answered, but she had suspected the worst. "No, you're not coming back." But assuring her that he would definitely be returning, he had left for Jaipur. Once with Srila Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna again resumed his silent insistence. Whenever there would be an open meeting in Prabhupada's room, the GBC leaders would usually sit in a privileged position near Prabhupada so as to best receive direct instruction. Tamal Krishna, however, would simply sit outside the door. The first time he did this, Prabhupada looked up and said, "Tamal Krishna, are you sitting outside? That is very nice." And the other devotees took it that Prabhupada was praising his disciple's humility. When on one occasion Prabhupada addressed Tamal Krishna as Tamal Krishna Maharaj, the devotees were startled. The women devotees in Jaipur, being close friends with Madri, became angry at what they took to be Tamal Krishna's duplicity. Although Prabhupada had not given permission, Tamal Krishna went ahead with his plans, even to the point of preparing his sannyas danda and dyeing his clothes. The women were outraged. Madri was not even there to represent herself. Altogether, the women went to see Srila Prabhupada, who patiently and sympathetically heard their presentation. Then Prabhupada called for Tamal Krishna and said, Your wife is my daughter, my disciple, and I have to think for her also. So I do not know how I can do this, because she will be in great difficulty." Tamal Krishna argued, but Prabhupada pacified him and asked him to be patient. The sannyas issue had become a topic of controversy among the devotees in Jaipur. The men were rooting for sannyas and the women were opposed. Prabhupada, however, remained grave. Throughout the week-long festival, large crowds continued to come for Prabhupada's morning and evening lectures. Prabhupada would chant prayers from Brahma Samhita and then lecture in Hindi. Not only did the citizens of Jaipur honor Prabhupada, but they honored his disciples also. Here, more than in most other Indian cities, the devotees were treated not as foreigners or outsiders, but as sadhus. "This whole city is made of devotees of Radha Govindaji," Prabhupada commented. The police chief, who visited often, was cordial and respectful. As Prabhupada and his disciples went from place to place in Jaipur during the day, policemen would salute them, halting traffic to let them pass. People invited Srila Prabhupada to their homes, and they treated him like a king. Prabhupada had also asked several women devotees to carefully observe the deity worship in Jaipur. They informed him they had observed that every night the deities were dressed in night clothes, and that their clothes were also changed at 2 other times, in the morning and in the afternoon. The women told Prabhupada how a priest offered the deities scented oils on cotton-tipped sticks, which the priests would later offer, along with flower garlands from the deities, to the incoming worshippers in exchange for fresh garlands. These devotional practices were standard, Prabhupada said, and could be introduced throughout ISKCON. Each evening, Prabhupada spoke at the pandal, and often a respectable Jaipur citizen would introduce him. When the Queen of Jaipur introduced him one evening, she expressed her devotional sentiments for Prabhupada and his movement. After lecturing each evening, Prabhupada would stay for a slideshow of ISKCON's activities around the world. One night during the slideshow, Srila Prabhupada called Tamal Krishna over beside his Vyasasan. "Taking sannyas will be difficult now," he said softly. "Your wife will suffer too much." He sat back a moment while Tamal Krishna took in what he had said. Then Tamal Krishna leaned forward and said with determination, "One way or another, Srila Prabhupada, she's going to suffer. Either she'll suffer now when I take sannyas, or if I take sannyas later on, she will be just as unhappy. There will never be a time when she'll want me to. So, since the feeling is going to be the same, it might as well come now. Free me. She'll get over it." Prabhupada said no more, but he remained thoughtful. Later that night, after the Pandal program, he called for his sannyasi disciples, Subala, Madhudwisha, Gargamuni, and Devananda, and for his personal secretary, Shyamasundar. Gathering them together along with Tamal Krishna, he said, "Tamal Krishna wants to take sannyas. So what is your opinion? Should he take or not?" Everyone agreed he should. Finally, Prabhupada consented. "You will have to prepare things," he said. "Things are prepared already," Tamal Krishna said. "Then," said Prabhupada, "tomorrow morning we must have the ceremony." The next morning, Prabhupada performed a special ceremony in the pandal, lighting the sacrificial fire and offering Tamal Krishna the sannyas danda. The women were angry with Tamal Krishna, but it was too late. After the ceremony, Prabhupada called Tamal Krishna Maharaj to his room. "You have given up a very good wife and a high position. Therefore, I am giving you the title Goswami. Now you have to be in the same mood as the Goswamis, being able to preach all over the world and accept disciples." Suddenly, Prabhupada began to laugh. "I have been testing you," he said, "to see whether or not you were determined. So, what will you do?" "I thought I would go with my danda," said Tamal Krishna Goswami, "and without anybody else simply wander from city to city in India and preach about Krishna without any vehicle or anything, just like Lord Chaitanya did." "Very good," Prabhupada said. Tamal Krishna Maharaj offered obeisances and walked out. Scarcely an hour later, however, Prabhupada called him back. "This is not a very good proposal," he said. "If you want to do something, you should have some assistance and facilities at your disposal." Prabhupada then assigned a couple of brahmacharis to go with Tamal Krishna Maharaj for preaching. He also gave his new sannyasi his first assignment. Immediately after Jaipur, Prabhupada was planning to go to a festival in Nairobi, Africa, yet in Ahmedabad, another program awaited him. "You go on my behalf to Ahmedabad," said Prabhupada. At Tamal Krishna Goswami's sannyas initiation, Srila Prabhupada had given him the sannyas mantra, a verse that describes the surrendered devotional attitude of the Vaishnav sannyasi. Vaishnav sannyas emphasizes engaging one's body, mind, and words in ecstatic service to Krishna, as distinguished from the sannyas of the impersonalists who speculate on Brahman or sit alone in silent meditation. The Vaishnava sannyasi, by taking shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna, crosses the ocean of nescience and brings others across with him. As Srila Prabhupada was demonstrating, a Vaishnava sannyasi should travel all over the world, working with all his might to reclaim the fallen souls on behalf of Lord Krishna. Vaishnava sannyas meant coming to places like Jaipur and preaching. It meant worshipping Govindaji in the temple, and it meant sending Radha Govinda to be worshipped by the devotees in New York City. It meant allowing women an equal opportunity to become pure devotees in Krishna consciousness, and it meant separating a man from his wife for the higher purpose of sannyas. Srila Prabhupada, although beyond the varnashram designation of sannyas, was nevertheless the best sannyasi and the creator of many other sannyasis whom he instructed to follow in his footsteps. He said his sannyasis should do even more than he, make more followers, publish more books, and establish more ISKCON centers. Bombay, January 24th, 1972. On returning to Bombay, Prabhupada was disappointed to find that the devotees had neither paid Mr. N nor moved to Juhu. Madhudwisha Swami, whom Prabhupada had put in charge, frankly admitted his inability to accept the responsibility for such a difficult project. The disciple Prabhupada had originally deputed to handle such affairs was Tamal Krishna Maharaj. But now that he had taken sannyas, he had renounced his GBC duties for traveling and preaching, and Prabhupada was without a manager for Bombay. Already Prabhupada was doing most of the managing, but he couldn't do everything. He couldn't stay constantly in Bombay. Searching for a veteran disciple to manage Juhu, Prabhupada thought of Brahmananda Swami, who was still preaching in Nairobi. Prabhupada decided to fly to Africa and invite Brahmananda Swami to come and manage Bombay. He wanted to act swiftly so that ISKCON could take possession of the land. Even if Mr. N changed his mind later, once the devotees were living on the land, getting them to leave would be very difficult for him. Srila Prabhupada planned to fly to Nairobi immediately, and he wanted to carry large Radha Krishna deities with him. The deities he had previously sent to Nairobi had been broken in shipping, so this time Prabhupada brought with him strong-bodied Madhudwisha Swami to carry the 36-inch marble deities. With special permission from the airlines, Prabhupada boarded, followed by Madhudwisha Swami, who held in his arms the 100-pound deity of Krishna. After setting Krishna in place beside Prabhupada's seat, Madhudwisha Swami left the plane and came back, carrying Radharani. Prabhupada passed most of the flight debating with Madhudwisha Swami, who took the position of the impersonalist. Prabhupada would always defeat him. "This is how you become a preacher," Prabhupada said. "You must be able to take both sides of the argument and defeat your adversary. This is what Lord Chaitanya would do." Since Prabhupada's first visit to Nairobi 4 months ago, Brahmananda Swami and a few American devotees had rented a house near the city. They had recruited some African devotees, but had not yet developed the temple and ashram. Barely able to maintain their own simple program, they were unprepared to receive Srila Prabhupada properly. Typical of Prabhupada's stay in Nairobi was his arrival. No one was at the airport to meet him. The devotees were not even sure if Prabhupada was coming. Prabhupada's secretary had phoned Brahmananda Swami that Prabhupada was willing to come to Kenya, but that Brahmananda Swami should try to arrange a meeting with the president and schedule a big Pandal festival. Brahmananda Swami, however, had never received a clear message of when Prabhupada was coming. At the airport, Prabhupada and Madhudwisha Swami carefully put the Radha Krishna deities into a taxicab and rode with them to the address of the ISKCON center. Prabhupada rang the doorbell, and when Brahmananda Swami opened the door and saw his spiritual master, he cried out, "Prabhupada," and bowed down. "What happened?" Prabhupada asked, standing beside Radha and Krishna. "Why no one came to pick us up at the airport?" Brahmananda Swami was unable to reply. No sooner did Prabhupada arrive than his assistant, Madhudvisha Swami, became bedridden with hepatitis. Prabhupada had left his regular secretary, Shyamasundar, in India to work on a legal case concerning the Mayapur land, so he was now without a personal assistant. In Nairobi, Prabhupada followed his usual schedule of bathing in the afternoon and then putting on fresh clothes, but one day after his bath he found that no clothes were ready. When he asked for them, Brahmananda Swami explained that the African servant had washed them and put them on the line to dry. But when Brahmananda Swami had gone to get them, they hadn't been there. Apparently, someone had stolen them from the clothes line. Prabhupada tolerated the inconvenience without any display of emotion. That evening, when the devotees of ISKCON Nairobi gathered in the temple to hear Prabhupada speak from Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada saw the different items of stolen clothing on the African boys. One boy wore the kurta, another the top piece, and another the dhoti. Prabhupada pointed this out to Brahmananda Swami, who immediately took the boys out and retrieved the clothing from them. When Brahmananda Swami returned the clothes, Prabhupada didn't seem to take the offense seriously, but only laughed. Prabhupada did not laugh, however, at the Nairobi devotees' bad cooking. When they served him white maize mush, he called it pig food, and the hard white chickpeas, he said, were suitable only for horses. Then Hari Kripa, a black devotee from America, went to the kitchen, boiled some vegetables, and served them to Prabhupada without any spicing. Prabhupada called it dog food. "You are still an uneducated African," he told Hari Kripa, and he went into the kitchen to cook for himself. Almost a dozen devotees joined him, watching him cook a complete meal of dal, rice, chapatis, and sabji. He cooked enough for all the devotees, and everyone was satisfied. Bad cooking and stolen clothing, however, continued to be problems during Prabhupada's week-long stay in Nairobi. Brahmananda Swami found that Prabhupada was mostly absorbed in his Bombay project. "The only reason I've come," Srila Prabhupada told Brahmananda Swami, "is to get you for this." Once he asked Brahmananda Swami, "Which is the most important city in India?" "Calcutta," Brahmananda replied. "Calcutta?" Prabhupada looked at him oddly. "Don't you know Bombay is number 1? Delhi is number 2, and Calcutta is number 3. Prabhupada encouraged Brahmananda Swami to return with him and take charge of the Bombay project. This Bombay project, he said, would be unique within ISKCON, incorporating the religious with the cultural in a gorgeous temple, international hotel, theater, and diorama exhibition. Seeing Prabhupada's strong desire, Brahmananda Maharaj agreed to somehow relinquish his Nairobi responsibilities to others and help in Bombay. In yet another way, Prabhupada's visit to Nairobi connected with his Bombay project. When Brahmananda Swami and Chavana showed Prabhupada the Nairobi Hilton, a modern building with twin round towers, Prabhupada liked the design and wanted to give it to his architect for the Bombay Hotel and Temple. Prabhupada, Brahmananda Swami, Bhagavat, and an African devotee were walking in Nairobi's public gardens. On being introduced to Prabhupada, the African had inquired, "If I want to, can I get married?" "Oh, yes," said Prabhupada. "But Prabhupada," the boy continued, "if you want to get married in our community, the boy has to pay money to the father of the bride." This was exactly opposite the Vedic system, Prabhupada replied, wherein the father of the bride presents a dowry to his son-in-law. Hearing this, Prabhupada's new disciple looked worried. He asked, "Then, will you give me money when I want to get my wife? Because I'm not working now, I'm just working for you. When I want to get my wife, will you give me money?" Prabhupada shook his head. "You don't worry about all of this," he said. "Whether you will get a wife or whether you will get money or this or that. Later on, when it is time for you to get married, I will bring one American girl and you will marry her." Wherever Prabhupada turned in his fledgling Nairobi temple, he found neophyte disciples and discrepancies. Walking into the brahmachari ashram, he found books, boards, and paint cans scattered about the room. When he said things should be kept more neatly and orderly, the temple commander, Hari Kripa, replied, "Prabhupada, I try to tell them, but these boys don't listen to me." Prabhupada bent down and picked up some pieces of wood. "If they don't do it," he said, "then you should do it. Put these over here." And Prabhupada began engaging all the men present. Within 5 minutes, the room was neat. The World Hare Krishna Movement Festival at Nairobi's City Stadium was a combination success and failure. Although Brahmananda Swami had managed to see many highly posted government officials and diplomats, many of whom had promised to attend the festival, none of them actually appeared, except for Mr. Y. Komora, Kenya's Director of Education. But an audience of several hundred attended Kirtan, heard Prabhupada's speech, and took prasadam. Although the devotees had invited the leading Kenyan citizens to enhance the glorification of Krishna, their honored guest, Mr. Komora, used the opportunity to speak in praise of Kenya. Nevertheless, he spoke highly of Prabhupada and the Krishna consciousness movement. Regarding Bhagavad Gita, he said, "Your learned founder has made this great book available in the English tradition with an erudite commentary." Srila Prabhupada also attended other engagements in and around Nairobi. He told his Nairobi disciples that in preaching to the Africans, they should stress the chanting of Hare Krishna by holding public kirtans. Lord Chaitanya, he said, spoke philosophy only with learned scholars like Sanatan and Rupa Goswami, never with ordinary men. Just chant Hare Krishna, he said. This should be appreciated. Srila Prabhupada installed the deities of Radha and Krishna, named the Nairobi temple Kirata Shuddhi, a place for purifying the Aborigines. One day, he installed the deities of Radha Krishna and named the Nairobi temple Kirata Shuddhi, a place for purifying the Aborigines. One day, shortly after the deity installation, however, Prabhupada walked into the temple room and was shocked to find the deities out of their proper place in the center of the altar. Krishna was standing to the far left beside the bottom step leading up to the altar, and Radharani stood to the far right. "Who has done this?" Prabhupada called out loudly. Bhagavat came running into the temple room. He also was astonished. "Who has put Radha and Krishna 10 miles apart?" Prabhupada demanded. "Don't you know these things? How many times do I have to teach you?" Bhuta Bhavana suddenly appeared, admitting that he was the culprit. "Why are they so far apart?" Prabhupada asked. "I don't know, Srila Prabhupada," said Bhuta Bhavana. "I guess I just forgot. I was being rushed to go to the festival." "So," Prabhupada demanded, "does that mean they should be put out in the street?" Bhuta Bhavana froze, unable to reply. Prabhupada relented. "Take them and put them together," he said. "They should not be moved more than 3 inches apart. Now do it nicely." After a week, Prabhupada left Nairobi and returned to Bombay. He had gone there to get Brahmananda Swami, and he had accomplished his mission. "Unless you agreed to take charge," Prabhupada said, "I could not go ahead and pay so much money. Now it is decided." He felt new hope. Prabhupada envisioned his Bombay project as extraordinary within ISKCON and even among all the temples of India. Many of the details of the project already existed within his mind, but he needed competent disciples to carry them out. He was still the lone leader of ISKCON, forging ahead to bring into reality new phases of the Krishna consciousness movement. His disciples were behind him, but it was always he who led. Even when he wanted his disciples as leaders of various ISKCON projects, they sometimes could not handle the responsibility. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada had gone to Nairobi in the mood of the Bengali aphorism he sometimes quoted. "If you want to accomplish a thing, do it by your own hand." So, by his own hand, he had brought Brahmananda Swami from Nairobi to Bombay. and simultaneously he had benefited the devotees and the general populace of Nairobi. Bombay, February 8, 1972. Prabhupada met with Mr. N and reiterated that he wanted to move onto the land as soon as Mr. N received the second 50,000 rupees. Mr. N stood firm on their agreement, and Prabhupada put the matter into the hands of his lawyer, Mr. D, for legal processing. Although Prabhupada was making all the managerial decisions, he wanted the GBC secretaries to take on the responsibility for these practical affairs. He thought it better to use his energy in writing and translating books. If you GBC do everything nicely, he told his secretary Shyamasundar, then my brain will not be taxed and I can utilize my time completely to produce further books. I can give you Vedas, Upanishads, Puranas, Mahabharat, Ramayana, so many. There are so many devotional works in our line by the Goswamis. This administrative work is taking too much time. I could be discussing philosophy. My brain is being taxed day and night. Because of this, I'm neglecting my real work. Aside from directly managing the Indian projects, Prabhupada was answering as many as a dozen letters daily from devotees around the world. Why do they keep writing, asking so many questions? He asked his secretary. The devotees prefer to ask you personally, Shyamasundar said, because their GBC men don't always know the right answer. They know everything by now, Prabhupada replied. I have given you everything. If they don't know the answer, they can find it in my books. Now, I am an old man. Let me settle down to philosophy. All day reading letters, doing business, all night signing letters. This is not right. I want to be free from these things. The GBC can do everything now. But it wasn't possible. As soon as Prabhupada would sense that one of his devotees was being cheated, he would immediately become actively involved. And his disciples continued to write him regarding important business and managerial decisions. Nor would he discourage them. His desire for retirement and exclusive literary work remained, but it seemed to be only a wishful thought, a dream. If ISKCON were to develop, then there seemed little scope for his retirement. After the meeting with Mr. N, Prabhupada prepared to leave for South India for a 5-day Pandal program in Madras. Also on his itinerary were visits to Kolkata, Mayapur, and Vrindavan. As he prepared to leave Bombay, he felt happy that ISKCON would soon occupy the new Juhu property, and he frequently spoke of his plans. ISKCON would erect a fabulous temple and form a cooperative housing society of devotees of Krishna, the first ISKCON city. Respectable men would purchase flats in ISKCON's high-rise condominium. Devotees would have to become expert to develop and operate such a complex. And as they became successful, they would introduce the same pattern in other cities. Businessmen and professional workers could live as devotees in a co-op society, housing their families and sending their children to an ISKCON school. Prabhupada repeatedly talked of constructing an international hotel, somewhat like a holiday inn, suitable for foreigners and traveling businessmen, yet reserving a floor for ISKCON life members who would receive free accommodations. The restaurant would be managed by expert Brahmin cooks, who would prepare dozens of different preparations of sumptuous prasadam. The deities Radha, Rasa Vihari would receive 52 offerings daily, and the prasadam would be distributed to residents and guests. To start things in the right direction, Prabhupada ordered the devotees to immediately arrange for a 10-day public festival on the new land. First, Brahmananda Swami should pay the agreed balance and move onto the land, along with all the devotees and the deities Radha Rasa Vihari. Then they should prepare a big pandal tent and arrange a full program, as they had previously in Bombay, in Calcutta, and in Delhi. Prabhupada wanted everything ready for his return in 2 weeks. Although, as Prabhupada would sometimes mention, in South India, the original Vedic culture was most intact, he had not been there in several years. Most of the great acharyas, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, had come from South India. and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, during his own touring, had found South India especially favorable. Just after the Hare Krishna Pandal festival in Delhi, on the eve of Prabhupada's first tour of Vrindavan with his disciples back in November of 1971, Achyutananda Swami, Brahmananda Swami, and Giriraj had volunteered to go to Madras to arrange a preaching program for Srila Prabhupada. When Achyutananda Swami had informed Prabhupada of the plan, Prabhupada had asked, "Oh, you are not going to Vrindavan with us?" "ISKCON is Vrindavan," Achyutananda Swami had replied. "Yes," Prabhupada had said, "my Guru Maharaj used to think like that." "But which do you want us to do?" Giriraj had asked. "What is the better service?" "I want to put on a pandal in Madras," Prabhupada had replied. "That would be more pleasing." Madras, February 11th, 1972. Prabhupada, accompanied by 20 disciples, arrived in Madras and immediately took part in a parade through the streets. The parade, led by a decorated elephant and a marching band, followed by the devotees' kirtan, featured Prabhupada riding in an old flower-covered American limousine. Prabhupada stayed as the guest of Mr. Balu, a Madrasi businessman. For 3 nights in the large hall packed with 5,000 people, Prabhupada lectured in English. One evening, he told a story from the Chaitanya Charitamrita of an illiterate South Indian Brahmin whom Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recognized for his staunch devotion to his spiritual master and to the Bhagavad Gita. The next morning, and each subsequent morning, The Hindu, one of Madras's 2 leading newspapers, printed a full summary of Prabhupada's lecture. The other principal newspaper gave a more general account of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami's arrival and the parade with his Western followers. The large 3-day program was followed by a more select gathering, sponsored by Mr. K. Veera Swami, the Chief Justice of Madras. Attending the function were judges, lawyers, and other leading citizens of the city. Several thousand people gathered beneath the open pavilion as Prabhupada spoke about Rupa Goswami and Sanatan Goswami of Vrindavan, who had given up their important government positions to join the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Indirectly, Prabhupada was requesting all the attending leaders of Madras to join the Krishna consciousness movement. Prabhupada was aware that his audience, although respectful, was steeped in impersonalism, deep-seated conviction that impersonal Brahman was supreme, and that all Hindu gods were equal manifestations of the One. And Prabhupada ended his talk by imploring his audience to accept Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. "Just repeat it," he said. "Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead." His appeal was so urgent and humble that some members of the audience actually repeated aloud, "Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead." The Hindu's editor and publisher, Mr. Kasturi, was in attendance, and he printed a detailed summary of Prabhupada's speech in the next day's paper. In addition to the usual news coverage, Srila Prabhupada held a press conference at a Madras hotel. Already happy with the press coverage, he appealed further to the room full of reporters. Giriraj. Prabhupada wasn't speaking to them as if they were newspaper reporters. Usually, a newspaper reporter has a stereotyped idea of who he is, and you giving an interview. So you have your stereotyped idea of who you are, and you answer his questions thinking of how it will be published. But I could see that Prabhupada was speaking to these reporters as spirit souls, as individual persons who are meant to be devotees of Krishna. Even though they were addressing him as newspaper reporters, he was answering them in a completely different way. He was encouraging them and saying, "This reporting that you have done is very nice. Krishna will bless you. Please help spread this movement." They were asking questions, thinking of his answers in terms of something to publish in the newspapers, but Prabhupada took it that they were spirit souls, reaching out toward Krishna consciousness, and he answered in that way. Within a few days of Prabhupada's arrival, the whole city was feeling the presence of the Hare Krishna movement. Prabhupada scarcely slept, using the early morning hours for translating, even after his late-night speaking engagements. He would go from place to place all day with great vitality, outdoing his young followers. Prabhupada's host, Mr. Balu, although a prominent businessman, was also well known as a religious man. He received Prabhupada warmly and respectfully, according to proper Vedic etiquette. Prabhupada noted that Mr. Balu had his own temple with beautiful Radha Krishna deities and a large tulsi plant. When the devotees accompanying Srila Prabhupada asked Mr. Balu why the deities were often dressed in black, he replied that they were so effulgent that if he didn't dress them in black, he wouldn't be able to look on them. He did not make prostrated obeisances to his deity, because he and his wife were Krishna's father and mother, he said, and how can the father pay obeisances to his son? Prabhupada and his host related to each other graciously, but one night Mr. Balu and his wife came to Srila Prabhupada and asked him to please speak about the Rasa Lila of Radha and Krishna. Footnote: the most exalted and intimate of Lord Krishna's pastimes, his dancing with the cowherd girls in Vrindavan. Prabhupada replied that the Rasa Lila, being the most exalted spiritual topic, was meant only for liberated souls. Only one completely free of material desires, Prabhupada explained, was fit to hear the Rasa Lila. No, Swamiji, Mr. Balu insisted. My wife and I are very keen. You must recite Rasa Lila. Again, Prabhupada described the exalted position of the Rasa dance, repeating that only when one is completely free of all material attachments to wife, family, home, and money could he become fit to hear of Krishna's Rasa dance. Mr. Balu then folded his hands and politely repeated, Swamiji, my wife and I plead with you, please recite the Rasa Lila. Then Prabhupada replied, well, you may be fit to hear Rasa Lila, but I do not feel that I am qualified to speak it. So kindly ask someone else. Prabhupada met privately with various important citizens of Madras. If the leaders of society became Krishna conscious, he would explain, then they, by their example, would create Krishna consciousness in the general populace. Never compromising, never flattering his important visitors, he tried to impart Krishna consciousness to whomever he met. He met with the governor of Madras, K. Shah, a staunch Mayavadi, and follower of Shankar Acharya. Patiently, Prabhupada tried to teach him Krishna consciousness, but the governor would interrupt him with his own philosophy. When Prabhupada asked him to somehow help the Krishna consciousness movement, the man replied that as governor there was nothing he could do, since everything was in the hands of the chief minister. Residing in Madras was an elderly scholar and former leading politician who had written several books and translations of Vedic philosophy from the impersonalist point of view. Prabhupada visited him, but the man was paralyzed and could only sit, trembling, without speaking. Prabhupada spoke for some time about personalism and the Gita. The old scholar sometimes responded with a glimmer in his eye, but he could only make incoherent sounds. Previously, Prabhupada had criticized this man's translation of the Gita, which declares that although Krishna says surrender unto him, we don't actually have to surrender unto the person Krishna, but to the impersonal eternal principle within Krishna. The meeting seemed to have a strong effect on Srila Prabhupada, and for days afterward he would sometimes soberly mention how the old Mayavadi scholar was living almost like a vegetable. Srila Prabhupada also met with V. Raj Gopal Acharya, Rajaji, who had been India's first chief executive after independence. A friend of Mahatma Gandhi, Rajaji was high in the public sentiment as a religious politician. although in his 90s, he was alert and very sympathetic to Prabhupada's movement. Rajaji expressed only one doubt. Prabhupada had created such a huge institution that now his disciples might identify with the institution rather than with Krishna. If that were to happen, then by identifying with the institution, they would again fall into the same type of materialism or false identification as before. Prabhupada replied that because Krishna is absolute, Krishna and Krishna's institution are non-different. To identify with Krishna's institution was to identify with Krishna directly. Rajaji was satisfied by Prabhupada's answer, and after a pleasant conversation, the two friends parted. Prabhupada received an invitation to Chief Justice Veera Swami's home. The two became friends, and the Chief Justice requested to join the Krishna consciousness movement as soon as possible. He liked Prabhupada's followers, especially 3-year-old Saraswati, and gave her a 6-inch silver murti of Krishna playing the flute. Another evening, Mr. Veera Swami came to see Prabhupada, and Prabhupada mentioned that he thought Saraswati too young to have such a valuable silver murti, and that he had taken it from her and was going to give her another one. But while they were talking, Saraswati burst into the room and ran to her mother, crying, "Krishna's gone!" Srila Prabhupada then called her forward and asked, "Saraswati, where is Krishna?" In anxiety, Saraswati replied, "I don't know, someone took him." Prabhupada repeated, "But where is Krishna?" Saraswati replied, "I don't know." "Is he under the cushion?" Prabhupada suggested. And Saraswati ran over to the cushion Prabhupada pointed to. She picked it up, but Krishna was not there. "Is he on the shelf?" Prabhupada asked. Saraswati ran to the shelf. Her eyes darted in all directions. "Where's Krishna?" Saraswati began, appealing to the faces of the devotees, glancing at their hands, looking behind their backs, searching everywhere. Prabhupada, intently watching Saraswati, began reciting a verse about the 6 Goswamis. "He Radhe Vrajadevi, Ke Chalalite He, Nandasuno Kuta." This is the mood of the Goswamis, he said. They never said, "Now I have seen God, now I am satisfied." No, rather they were saying, "Where is Radha? Where is Krishna? Where are you all now? Are you on Govardhan? Or are you under the trees on the bank of the Jamuna? Where are you?" In this way they expressed their moods of Krishna consciousness. Saraswati's anxiety had become heightened to the point of tears. One of the devotees then hinted, "Saraswati, where is Krishna? Who has Krishna?" Saraswati's eyes widened. She exclaimed, "Prabhupada has Krishna," and she rushed up to Prabhupada, convinced that he was holding Krishna. And Prabhupada reached behind his seat and pulled out a small Krishna murti similar to the silver Krishna he had taken from her. "Here is Krishna, Saraswati," Prabhupada said. Saraswati was in ecstasy. All the devotees were struck by Prabhupada's exchange of devotional feelings with even a small child. By his expertise, he had created within her a mood of separation from Krishna. Prabhupada continued explaining to the Chief Justice about the mood of separation from Krishna. For centuries, certain religious and social controversies had divided Madras, and Prabhupada often addressed these issues. One conflict was between the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. Because those born in Brahmin families had traditionally monopolized the important governmental, social, and religious posts, the non-Brahmins had developed a powerful political opposition, passing laws banning such things as religious pictures. In their mundane political conception of the sacred Ramayana, they had even committed offenses to the deities of Lord Ram. In talking with his disciples, Srila Prabhupada said, "The Chief Justice is Brahmin? I don't think so. He may be a Kshatriya. But you can tell him that we can solve the whole problem between the Brahmins and the non-Brahmins. We will give facility that anyone can become a Brahmin. He simply has to follow our principles and we will make him a Brahmin. Prabhupada said, the Shastra states that in Kali Yuga the demons will take birth as Brahmins, thus this deep controversy. The so-called Brahmins, the leaders, were not satisfying the people. Prabhupada said that anyone who followed the four regulative principles, chanted Hare Krishna, and took Vaishnava initiation could become a Brahmin, and that would solve the whole problem. They should begin, Prabhupada said, by making Chief Justice Veeraswamy a Brahmin. Mr. Veeraswamy admitted that he was already eager to take initiation from Srila Prabhupada. His only difficulty was giving up tea drinking. When Prabhupada heard this, he said that even if the justice did drink a little tea, he would accept him as an exceptional case. Some of Madras's caste-conscious Brahmins criticized Srila Prabhupada's creating Brahmins from low-born Westerners. During a gathering at the home of a Madrasi Brahmin, one of the guests commented to Prabhupada, "Swamiji, your disciples don't pronounce the Sanskrit very nicely. Even the Hare Krishna mantra they sometimes do not say correctly." "Yes," Prabhupada replied, "that is why we have come here, to get your association, so you can teach us." Srila Prabhupada encountered another long-standing South Indian feud between the Shaivites, the followers of Lord Shiva, and the Vaishnavas, followers of Lord Vishnu. The Shaivites generally espoused an impersonalistic philosophy, declaring God to be the impersonal one, appearing in many forms, such as Shiva and Krishna. But since all the forms were one ultimately, fighting as to which God was best was petty and childish. Prabhupada's disciples found this philosophy difficult to deal with, and when Giriraj had argued with a wealthy Shaivite, Mr. Ramakrishna, they had separated with hurt feelings. But in meetings with other persons in Madras, Giriraj was often reminded, "Have you met Mr. Ramakrishna? He is a very good man and a leader in religious functions." Giriraj became embarrassed and decided to make another attempt to win Mr. Ramakrishna's friendship. They talked again, but remained unsatisfied. Giriraj then informed Prabhupada and asked if he would meet Mr. Ramakrishna himself. Prabhupada agreed. When they met, Mr. Ramakrishna began by saying, "Swamiji, we have been having some discussion about devotion to Lord Krishna and devotion to Lord Shiva. What do you say? Who is greater, Krishna or Shiva?" Prabhupada replied that actually the word bhakti or devotion could not properly be applied to the worship of Lord Shiva. Bhakti, he said, meant service without any material desire, whereas puja included service with the desire for some return. Bhakti, therefore, could only be applied to Krishna. "But isn't it possible," asked Mr. Ramakrishna, "for someone to be a bhakta of Lord Shiva and to worship Lord Shiva simply out of devotion, without desiring any material benefit?" "It may be possible," Prabhupada replied, "but generally not. Just like when a person enters a liquor shop, generally it's taken that he is going for drinking, although there may be some exception." Prabhupada gave the example of the gopis' worship of the goddess Katyayani. Their worship had not been for material benefit, but for devotion to Krishna. Similarly, if one worshipped Lord Shiva with the aim of serving Lord Krishna, that would be bhakti. But people generally approach Shiva for material benefit. Although Mr. Ramakrishna was usually prone to argue these points, Prabhupada's answer satisfied him. Srila Prabhupada's most acute controversy in Madras was not with Smarta Brahmins, Mayavadis, or Shaivites, but with some of his own godbrothers. Although some of them acknowledged Srila Prabhupada's incomparable preaching in the West on behalf of their spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, others were envious. One envious godbrother wrote to Srila Prabhupada in Madras, quote, Reverend Swamiji, I listened to your discourse on Bhakti at Rajiswari Kalayana Mandapam on the 12th instant. I am filled with doubts on the following. Your disciples dance with Hare Krishna mantram. Are they really? Hare Krishna mantram 1. Are they really God intoxicated as Lord Chaitanya? 2. Have you, Swamiji, really got free of your ego? If so, why you said I challenge, and why are words like I and my always on your lips? 3. Why do you use a cushion, unlike a real yogi? Did Lord Chaitanya use cushions? 4. Why do you wear ring and a wrist gold watch? Are you not free from material attachment? 5. Did you visit Lord Chaitanya Krishna Temple at Gaudiya Math? If not, why not? The purest Vaishnava cult is indwelling there with pious Swamijis, with Lord Krishna dwelling therein. Melodious sound from your throat is absent, but a jarsing, undivine, comes out. Is there any divinity in your person? I doubt. One disgusted on hearing your speech. Unquote. Although Srila Prabhupada was surprised and hurt by the extreme virulence of such a letter, he was accustomed to his godbrother's slights and insults. He forbade his disciples, however, to get involved in fights with his godbrothers. Rather, they should simply avoid them. He said that persons who criticized the spreading of the Krishna consciousness movement were useless, and that he would push on. The dogs may bark, but the caravan will pass. In contrast to the venomous letter came a letter from Tridandi Swami B.V. Puri Maharaj, another of Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers. Puri Maharaj, as Prabhupada called him, had a small ashram in Visakhapatnam, on the Bay of Bengal between Madras and Calcutta. Hearing that Prabhupada was going next to Calcutta, Puri Maharaj invited him to visit. Quote, with innumerable satsanga dandabats at thy lotus feet, I beg to acknowledge the kind letter. Ellipses. The citizens of Visakhapatnam are very anxious to have the darshan of your holiness. Ellipses. We are exceedingly glad and eager to hear Sankirtan and the divine message from your holy lips. I hope the Sankirtan movement at Madras is attracting thousands of citizens. Again, with dandabats to all the Vaishnavas, I remain Dasanu B.V. Puri. Visakhapatnam, February 17, 1972. A broad beach of white sparkling sands and the Bay of Bengal's warm, clear waters were special features of Srila Prabhupada's visit to Visakhapatnam. Puri Maharaj's small ashram, where Srila Prabhupada stayed, was only 5 minutes from the ocean, and every morning Prabhupada and his entourage of about 15 devotees would take long walks along the seashore. Jamuna. I don't think Prabhupada ever excluded any of us from going with him to the beach. All the devotees knew at which time Srila Prabhupada would be taking his walk, and we would come out from our different quarters and follow him to the seashore. The walks were brisk and refreshing and full of talk about Krishna. Somehow or other, we were all able to hear Srila Prabhupada speak. Guru Das. I always went on every morning walk. But one time, I was sitting in the temple when suddenly I saw Prabhupada and the devotees going toward the beach. I immediately ran out of the temple to join them without even taking time to get my shoes. But there were barnacles and rocks leading down to the beach. When Prabhupada saw me coming, lifting my feet up high, painfully hobbling down the rough road, he looked over and said, "Oh, your feet are hurting? Why aren't you wearing shoes?" And I said, "Prabhupada, when I'm with you, I don't feel any pain." Prabhupada stopped and said, "Then why don't you cut your throat?" Everyone laughed, and I laughed also. He said, "There is enough tapasya. Why create your own?" Guru Kripa. Prabhupada would talk philosophy on and on. There were many things I couldn't understand. I would just listen anyway, although I couldn't remember anything. I would just hear and hear, but it hadn't registered yet. I used to walk behind him on the beach, and I figured that, if I can't follow his teachings or example yet, at least let me step in his footsteps in the sand. Vishaka. Sometimes a dog would try to follow us or would bark at us. We were all surprised to see how Prabhupada would flick his cane and the dog would run away. Once, when we passed a cow on the road, Prabhupada gave her ample room to pass, and he told us the story of how he had been gored by a cow shortly after he had taken sannyas. Tejas. Once on a morning walk, Prabhupada was speaking about the dog. He gave a reference to a shloka by Chanakya Pandit about the 5 good qualities of a dog, that he is very faithful and satisfied with anything. And soon, Prabhupada said, we should be Krishna's dog. He was also speaking about how our pujaris should never be paid. The teacher and the pujari should never receive a salary. They must work in pure devotion. The kshatriya also. He said that was the mistake in government today, that the kshatriyas are being paid. He discussed so many things, one after another. Nanda Kumar. Srila Prabhupada would tell us to go bathe in the ocean. Go to the beach, he would say. So, one day I asked him, Srila Prabhupada, whenever I go down to the beach, the sun is warm on my body, the water feels so good, the sand, it seems like such a comfortable material situation. How should I understand your reason for asking us to go to the beach? I know the spiritual master never gives the disciple anything that will cause him to become materially attached, but always gives him whatever he needs to remember Krishna. But when I go to the beach, it seems I just enjoy my senses. How can I relate that to Krishna? How can I understand that this instruction is for my spiritual benefit? Prabhupada said, the sun is there. Krishna is the light of the sun. The ocean is there. Krishna is the taste of water. You are surrounded by Krishna. How can you forget Krishna? He is all around you. Panchajanya. I was a new devotee, and I asked Prabhupada, what about swimming, Srila Prabhupada? Is that not Maya? Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya used to go swimming all the time. He used to play ball. So you can go and swim. Just make sure you remember Krishna. Puri Maharaj's ashram was a simple single-story building of about 8 rooms. When he offered Prabhupada a room next to his own, Prabhupada was pleased, accepting it as an expression of friendship. Prabhupada relaxed with his godbrothers, Puri Maharaj and Ananda Brahmachari, speaking with them in Bengali. Puri Maharaj said he appreciated Prabhupada's work and his Western disciples. Prabhupada's disciples had already seen formal exchanges of obeisances between Prabhupada and his godbrothers, as when in Bombay they had seen Prabhupada get off his Vyasasana and offer dandavats to his godbrothers. But in Visakhapatnam, they saw more intimate dealings. They saw for the first time Srila Prabhupada living comfortably at ease in the same quarters as his godbrothers. And they didn't feel themselves being treated condescendingly or superficially, or being regarded as oddities. Through Prabhupada's guidance, they began to learn more of the essential, friendly, and humble exchanges between Vaishnavas. Prabhupada's godbrother Ananda was eager to cook and serve not only Srila Prabhupada, but all his disciples. Ananda was elderly, and yet he took the position of always offering menial service. Although he spoke very little English, Prabhupada's disciples could perceive the affection of Ananda and Srila Prabhupada for each other. Ananda's communication with Prabhupada's disciples was particularly through his cooking and serving of prasadam. Each morning, everyone would gather on the veranda outside Prabhupada's quarters, the men sitting on one side, the ladies on the other. Down the center aisle, Ananda would walk briskly, distributing prasadam, while Prabhupada sat at one end in a wooden chair, fingering his japa beads and observing the devotees take prasadam. Prabhupada had supplied money to the ashram, and Ananda was regularly cooking sumptuous feasts: deep-fried chunks of potatoes in powdered spices, rice, yogurt, dal, 3 different types of sabjis, French fries, chutney, malpura, rajkeli, sandesh, kshira, and everything cooked to a nectarian standard of excellence. Prabhupada would sit at the head of the 2 rows of devotees and encourage them to take prasadam. Give him more, Prabhupada would praise Ananda's cooking, smiling with pleasure to see his disciples accept prasadam. The devotees would finish, having been induced to eat as much as they possibly could, and Srila Prabhupada would say aloud the prema dwani. Then all the devotees would shout in response, Jai! After one such feast, Prabhupada called the devotees into his room and remarked, "See how he is cooking. He cooks everything, he serves it, and then he doesn't eat until everyone is fully satisfied. This is Vaishnava, how he should act. He is more satisfied to serve than to enjoy himself." The feasts continued twice a day, and in the evening many guests arrived to take prasadam, chant in the kirtans, and hear Srila Prabhupada lecture. One day Srila Prabhupada took his disciples to see a famous temple of Lord Nrsimha, Sri Singhachalam, on top of a hill about 5 miles north of Visakhapatnam. Thousands of stone steps led up the hill to the temple, which was situated in a natural amphitheater on the side of the hill. Prabhupada said the temple, which was now run by followers of the Ramanuja sect, was particularly important because Lord Chaitanya had visited there on his tour of South India. Srila Prabhupada chose to approach the temple by car, riding up the winding road past orchards of mango, jackfruits, and cashew, and fields of pineapple. On arriving at the temple, Srila Prabhupada and his disciples met one of the temple Brahmins, who showed them around the grounds. The temple buildings were of black granite, and carved into the rock were the forms and pastimes of Vishnu, especially in his incarnation of Lord Nrsimha. As Prabhupada moved from place to place, building to building, he sometimes rode up steep stairs on a palanquin carried by 4 men. When Prabhupada came upon an immense banyan tree at the lower end of the temple grounds, he said that the tree must be thousands of years old. As he stood beneath the tree, his servant Nanda Kumar handed him a small champaka flower. Extending his thumb and forefinger from his bead bag, Prabhupada held the champaka flower and looked fondly at it. "This flower," he said, "is the color of Lord Chaitanya, and this flower is the most loved all over India. This flower is beautiful to look at and beautiful to smell." He carried the small saffron gold flower between his fingers throughout the rest of the morning. When Prabhupada and his group entered the inner sanctum where the deity of Lord Nrsimha resided, their guide explained that the murti dated back to the time of Prahlad Maharaj. An ancient king named Pururava and his consort Urvashi had once visited this hill, and at the request of Urvashi, the murti, who appeared to her in a dream, had been excavated. The Lord had ordained that he should be worshipped in this place, but that he would give darshan only 1 day a year during the month of Vaishakha. The rest of the year he would be entirely covered with ground sandalwood pulp mixed with camphor and other scents. Therefore, the deity now appeared to be only a lump covered with a layer of sandalwood. Prabhupada commented that the sandalwood was to keep the deity cool-headed. Madhavananda. When Prabhupada was at the Nrsimha temple in Visakhapatnam, it was the same as when he was in Vrindavan. When he got out of the car, he was very grave. We went into the temple, and there was a chamber. Then we went down. The walls were 4 feet thick, and it seemed like hundreds of feet of tunnels before we got into the inner sanctum. There was the deity with just a mound of sandalwood paste on him. As soon as we entered, Prabhupada said, "Begin chanting the Nrsimha mantra." So we started singing Tavakara Kamalavare Nakam Adbhuta Sringam, and we circumambulated the deity. Then we stood before the deity, and Prabhupada offered obeisances. Guru Kripa. When we came into the deity room, Prabhupada had us sing the Nrsimha prayers. He always manifested such devotion. That was what separated him from us, not only his learning or his knowledge, but his devotion. In these places we would see him become very silent, very grave, and when he would speak, such peace would fill us from within. When he would speak, you could feel it. He was constantly convincing us of Krishna consciousness. Not purposely, but he was just being himself. In these places, it would come out. When Prabhupada stood with us before the deity, we couldn't even see. There was just a mound of sandalwood. There was one Brahmin with big earlobes, and he had a ring in his ear. We offered some money, but it was a very devotional time. Prabhupada didn't say much, and the main reason was that these places are appreciated according to one's spiritual advancement. The details and facts and the history are not really that important. There's nothing really to say. Prabhupada would just make sure we had the proper respect and didn't commit any offense. Prabhupada would lecture in the evening, speaking sometimes at schools and social clubs in Visakhapatnam. During the program at the Ramakrishna Hall, where more than 1,000 people attended, Srila Prabhupada's dancing induced the entire audience to dance. The devotees danced in a ring around Srila Prabhupada, and the kirtan continued for an hour. At another program, a bearded American anthropologist rode up on a motorcycle to attend Prabhupada's lecture and kirtan. Afterward, the anthropologist told Srila Prabhupada that he had come to India to study the primitive tribes. Prabhupada told him it was simply a waste of time. "Why do you want to study the primitive people?" he asked. "Why don't you study the exalted people?" And Prabhupada narrated a story. One time, a poor man roasted a cob of corn and then began picking off the kernels one at a time and eating them. In this way, it took him many hours to finish. He did this, Prabhupada said, because he had nothing else to do, just to pass the time of day. In the same way, the study of anthropology was simply a waste of time. Prabhupada asked, "Why don't you study some person or group of persons from whom you can learn something?" During the day, Prabhupada would sit outside his room and enjoy the atmosphere. He wore no shirt, and his healthy body shone with a golden luster as he sat drinking freshly pressed sugarcane juice. "This is just how it is in Vaikuntha," he said. "There is always a very cool, pleasant breeze." He often walked about, chanting, talking about Krishna, listening to the devotees' kirtans, and observing the activities of the temple. Repeatedly, Prabhupada invited Puri Maharaj to come and preach in the West. He requested him to at least come to Mayapur for ISKCON's international gathering of devotees. Prabhupada felt that Puri Maharaj, on seeing all the Western disciples, might feel moved to join him and preach. Puri Maharaj agreed to accompany Prabhupada to Calcutta and Mayapur, and the pleasant week in Visakhapatnam came to an end with Prabhupada, his disciples, and Puri Maharaj looking forward to traveling together to Calcutta. Guru Kripa. Although we arrived at the train station early, the train was already at the platform. It was very hot, and 5 or 6 of us were having kirtan. Then Shama Sundar climbed up a coconut tree and got this fantastic coconut. He opened it and gave it to Prabhupada, who proceeded to drink a lot. Then Prabhupada gave it to Shama Sundar, and Shyam Sundar drank. Then Prabhupada said, "Give it to the kirtan members." Each man in the kirtan group was so thirsty that he wasn't even thinking of leaving any for the next man, but would just pass this coconut around. And the thing wouldn't empty. I tilted it up, and the coconut water was coming out, pouring on my shirt, and I was drinking and drinking, but still it wouldn't empty. We were amazed. Prabhupada was smiling, and we were chanting. We all became cool and satisfied. Shama Sundar. Prabhupada and I were in a first-class railway coach, a private compartment for 2 persons, clackety-clacking through the warm Indian night, somewhere between Visakhapatnam and Calcutta. Prabhupada was talking and joking and playing tapes until around 10:30 p.m., when he lay down to take rest. For a while I switched off the lights. At about midnight, Prabhupada sat upright and called my name. "Shama Sundar, take dictation," he said. Then followed a train of thoughts so lucid and coherent that I could only conclude that while we think Srila Prabhupada is sleeping, he is usually not sleeping, but is thinking, reflecting on ways to serve Krishna more and more.